Thank you very much for joining us today for the first fall reading of the SMSU Visiting Writers Series. My name is Marianne Murphy Zarzana, and I am the Director of the Creative Writing Program here at SMSU. Please take a moment now to silence your electrical devices. Today it's my great pleasure to introduce Jim Zarzana, a Sacramento, California native who received his undergraduate degree from St. Mary's College of California, his master's degree from Sacramento State University, and his doctorate from the University of Notre Dame. While at Notre Dame, he focused on British literature, in particular the British novel. Currently, he teaches literature, composition, and a variety of liberal education program courses at Southwest Minnesota State University. He has also served as chair of the English department. Jim is the author of a new science fiction novel, The Marsco Dissident, the first in a 4-book series titled The Marsco Saga. The book paints a picture of a post-nationhood world in which a single megacorporation, Marsco, has absolute control of computer usage. The book is available on Amazon Kindle and for download on iPads, iPhones, and computers. Jim is planning to release Book 2, Marsco Triumphant, this December. In the spring of 1981, I had the good fortune to meet Jim Zarzana when our paths crossed in South Bend, Indiana. I was working as an editor for Notre Dame Publications, and Jim was working on his PhD. From the beginning, we shared our writing with each other. Poems, essays, and stories. Over the past 30 years, we have been each other's harshest critics, as well as greatest supporters. I've been inspired by Jim's ability to create complex characters who live and breathe. In fact, Walter, Tessa, and Zat have lived in the Zarzana household for the past 17 years. Jim has also created a believable dystopian world that unfolds in the distant future. Please join me in warmly welcoming a writer who takes his readers far out into the solar system, as well as deep into the shadowy recesses of the human spirit. Jim Zarzana.
Thank you. First of all, I have to say this is a bit overwhelming because of the number of people and also the lights because we're filming this. So it's kind of like, I'll talk. And I'm going to put on my reading glasses, which means that pretty soon I won't see any of you, so don't think that I've forgotten that you're out there. I read this afternoon at the library. It was very nice of them to have me. If you are on Facebook and you get the SMSU Today Facebook link, you can see a few pictures. Jim was very polite. Jim Tate took the pictures and posted them, Jim and Marcy. He was very polite. He cut out the heaps of flowers that they threw at me at the end, so if you didn't bring bouquets tonight, you won't feel bad, you know, if you look at the web page and go, wow, oh geez, I should have run a flower. So anyway. I think, is that yours? Okay. So I do want to say a few thank yous. Again, thank you for coming. Thank you for for the department to say, oh yeah, you know, you can do this. I also want to say right off the bat, the novels, there's 4, are really possible because of Southwest for lots of reasons. My editor is Kathy Bernardi-Jones, who's a graduate of this university. She graduated when it was Southwest State University. Do I admit it, back in the 90s, she was one of my students, and she has a professional business as a copy editor, and she had never done a novel before, and she was here to speak on campus about 2.5 years ago, and I said, would you be interested? It's a big project. She does magazine articles and whole magazines, and so we agreed, and she was very, very helpful. Dana Yost, also a graduate of this department, helped format it for me to get it onto Kindle. And of course, Neil Smith, I want him to wave, but he's not going to, but you all know Neil, really encouraged me. I often tease about the fact that we switch places. You know, he's the mentor and I'm the mentee, and I did figure this out with my pocket calculator. I'm old enough to be his father. You know, this is supposed to be the other way around. But Neil really encouraged me to self-publish on Amazon and do the Kindle route. I think it's the wave of the future. I'm hoping it's the wave of the future. So I do want to acknowledge and thank you for all of that, for all your help. I don't have a hard copy. It's only an e-reader at this point, as Marianne mentioned. That's not a problem. You can download it to, maybe you should make that decision after you hear me read, but anyway, you can download it to a Kindle. Obviously that's tied to Amazon, but any iPod, iPad, and a PC, you might have to download a free application to get Kindle. And I do have some ad cards. I don't have anything else for you, but if you're interested and you can't remember things like Zarzana, you know, you can pick those up, and they're right over there. Okay. So, I have to give you a little bit of background. The first two characters that I'm going to read about tonight are Tessa Miller and her father, Walter Miller. Now, Walter is an engineer, an astro-engineer. He makes engines for spaceships. This is in the year 2092. Marsco has been in control of the Earth for about 25 years. And he's been working most of that time for Marsco as a very, very successful engineer. And about 10 years before the book begins, he took a sabbatical and kind of stayed on sabbatical and came back to Earth. He had been on Mars. And he has now a grange. It's like a small farm. So he's just trying to live where he's not part of Marsco, and of course he's not the lowest order of society. They're called prims. They are essentially monitored by Marsco. They get a disc under their skin of their left hand, the back of their left hand, that's basically just like UPS tracks a package with a RFID. That's basically what they do with these people. And that's most of the world. Unfortunately, it'll be most of us. Then there's a group called the SIDS for subsidiaries, or from the subsidiaries. And so SIDS are sort of lower middle class. Somebody has to run the transport. Somebody's got to milk the cows. And then there's associates. They are members of Marsco. Now, the cover shows a hand, and this is the real hook. This is clearly an associate's hand, because even if you can't see it too well, at the tip of two of the fingers, there are these dots. 3 are blue, 1 is red. And not everybody would have a red one, but those are finger discs, and that's how you run a computer. And by and large, only associates get finger discs, and only with them can you run a computer. There's one little exception I might mention somewhere, in which case I'll stop and tell you why. But that's pretty much what's going on. Okay, last two bits of tech, and then I'll start to read. They're at Miller's Grange. He has, which had been a big starter castle 100 years before, you know, one of these big artificial lake, and now he's made it into a farm. So there's like a 5-car garage he's turned into this workspace. That's where they're walking into. They are into. So there's two types of craft. One's called an HFC for hover flight craft, and that basically is like an automobile and helicopter mixed, no blade. It uses a jet engine. And Miller's fixed one of those up. That's the first thing. And then they'll talk about landers. And landers are a spacecraft that can leave the Earth or Earth orbit and go out to the moon and come back, you know. Or it can go from the surface of the moon out to an orbiting dock, something like that. So it's called a lander, all right? So Miller and Tessa have been looking at this restored HFC. Miller lifted a canvas cover from the aft portion of his restoration. Along the now exposed fuselage, a hand-painted emblem greeted Tessa. It showed a stylized Earth and moon, linked in a sideways figure 8 that suggested a spacecraft egressing orbit around the planet, reaching the lunar sphere, and returning to its Earth-based home. In navy blue letters above the emblem ran the heading, Sac City, that's where they are, Sac City, that's Sacramento 100 years from now, Sac City Aerospace Associates. Below ran the bold statement, independent conglomerate of lander manufacturers and operators. The emblem and slogan suggested a smartly done advertisement campaign from the last century. Tessa's face posed the question. "Oh, this," he answered. "Conglomerate?" Bit pretentious, I know. He unassumingly patted the enigmatic lettering before explaining, "I've cobbled together a research team and a few abandoned assembly plants. We're getting started, making do. Sac City has a fine history of making rocket engines. Seattle, where our fuselages are built, had a thriving aerospace industry once, pre-Marsco. So your SCAA is still in its infancy, its grandiose infancy? Marsco started with Mars in its name way back in 1999 because it was aiming heavenward. 3 geeks, a rented office, and a name. Not much more. Now look." Of course, they rule everything out to the asteroid belt. Tessa had no rejoinder for her father except to acknowledge that he was always a dreamer. She shrugged, then mentally added, "Fortune favors the bold." "Now for my second surprise," Miller finally stated. In a smaller workroom off the larger one, Miller stowed a gray plastic mock-up of a sublunar lander, just over 1 meter in length, sitting on a studio table. A full-size lander of this design would be capable of easily making the Earth-to-Moon journey suggested by the Runabout's emblem. It's a standard Harif design, more or less. I've worked on its engines mostly. They'll be more efficient than anything going today. Harif runs the Mars-based research center. He's the best designer. Propellant, standard Marsco hydrogolics. Miller explained the components of such fuel needlessly to the other aerospace engineer. She's an engineer like him, and she teaches at their academy, their space academy. Hydrazine dimethylene dramaza mixture comes in contact with nitrogen tetraoxide in the ship's combustion chamber, instantaneously ignite with an explosive reaction. In space, it's been the standard chemical fuel for well over 150 years. "Walter," she reminded him patiently, "this is first semester lecture stuff. I explain this to my plebes all the time." "Yes, but shouldn't we be beyond that by now?" the senior engineer asked rhetorically. "Chem fuels, for heaven's sakes, obsolete in the first decade of this century." "Well, come up with a viable alternative. Don't think I haven't tried. At the VBC, you'd have plenty of opportunity to try, more than try." He responded more sharply than he intended, lashing out when he knew he shouldn't. "Is that why you're here? To talk me back into Marsco for Harif?" "No," she shot back just as sharply. "Yesterday, what did you call yourself? An associate who was still in good standing? Today you deny you're even in Marsco? Rather a moot point, don't you think? I'm certainly not an associate in the sense that you want me to be." As their discussion simmered, Tessa sensed it was ranging out beyond her control. Before he moved into that territory, a précis of what might have been in this century, she reached for a safe question. "Have you flown this one yet?" "Flown it? I don't even have a full-size mock-up. I haven't even tested the engines yet, but I'm working on them. I'm quite close to that, actually." "Finishing the engines?" "Yes." "Here?" "No, out at the old aerospace test site, 35 clicks to the east. But I have to test them horizontally on Earth, not in orbit like we did back at Harif Center." Slipping into a description of his dream, he continued, "Their lifting capacity is, via computer simulation, 55% higher than anything Marsco currently operates. I think with a few refinements, we'll top 60%. "What's the scale?" Tessa asked, fingering the intricate workings of the plastic model on the table and wishing to avoid any more flashpoints. 1 to 75. "She's a massive brute, isn't she?" "Yes, that's for sure," Miller replied with a hint of justified pride. "When do you build your dog ship?" "Our prototype's a ways off. In the works, of course, but only a long-range plan. We'll build the engines here and the fuselage in Seattle. This craft will be bigger than any standard sublunar lander. That's the whole point. Larger, more capacity, a buff, as the old airman might say, but more efficient, meaning she won't need to refuel in space for a return trip to Earth. Miller let that remark hang in the air without further comment. He watched his daughter think over the implication of that fact. "But I don't see the need," the Marsco officer eventually responded, not readily wishing to admit the ramifications of a craft with such muscled-up specs. Marsco already has an extensive, expanding, and dedicated lander fleet, plus ample docking ports on its orbiting lunar stations. Now who's lecturing? But I'm thinking of working with independent concerns. But even the Indies utilize Marsco ports, spaceports, you know. The engineer's eyes gleamed with boyish excitement. I'm thinking of bypassing Marsco. Bypassing Marsco in space? How? By getting around its 12 thrusters policy? Is that your implication? I don't see how that's possible. She won't need servicing in space, that's how. 12 thrusters keeps every independent tied to Marsco. Those regs have kept Marsco the sole operator in space for nearly 70 years. What's wrong with that? The associate sought to keep her employer's reputation intact. Every craft is serviced, no exceptions. There's no system allowed in orbit that can't be maintained out there all the way to the asteroid belt. All standardized. That's my point exactly. 12 thrusters gives Marsco a crushing monopoly on space travel, and they have had it, maintained it for the past 7 decades. But there are independents. Now Tessa's eyes flashed. Marsco allows them to operate, but always through its ports, using its registered and regulated thrusters, and buying only its fuels. Exactly, Tessa stated firmly, reinstating the right of eminent domain. Everything off the Earth goes Marsco. That's the space motto, by the way. So with her, he motioned to his detailed model reverently, we avoid Marsco. Tessa's mind worked to find all the hidden pitfalls in such a quixotic program, but she was also multitasking and working out to find the value of such labor spent on a seemingly futile project. Why would you want to avoid Marsco? Dead silence surrounded father and daughter for a moment. Finally, he broke the tension. Just to manufacture something legal and positive that its HQ doesn't totally control, just to show it that it isn't the only game in space anymore. Maybe to give this subsidiary a reason to exist when we make half a dozen landers to compete with Marsco's hundreds. There's a little break in the passage. As her father twitch-locked, twitch is you're using your finger disc, right? As her father twitch-locked the work areas, Tessa stood silently in the pale blue-gray of the Marsco moon beside her outside the secret-filled grange. Lofty dreams, she thought, always been a dreamer, aiming for the stars. Well, his engines are on the way to Jupiter as we speak. Some dreams do come true. Faint mechanical clicking and whirling noises from behind them caught Tessa's attention. The dogs, there's 2 dogs, the dogs at her heels whimpered and futilely tried hiding themselves in the shadows. The associate reacted as any trained officer would to an unknown threat. A hissing sound filled the air. Her taunt arm leveled an Enfield. That's the standard gun of an associate. So she's walked around with a gun on her hip, right? A surveillance drone hovered 10 meters from the Millers. The saucer-shaped craft, less than a meter in diameter, trained an IR scanner on the pair and aimed a small dish antenna toward its central coordinating unit somewhere off in the distance beyond the hedges. Predictable, isn't it? Miller commented, his hand lowering Tessa's Enfield. God only knows what insect-sized snoopers it sends. You expected this drone, didn't you? Who sent it? Oh, my friends with the eye on you. That's a camera stanchion, you know, CCTV, you know, they're watching him all the time. Oh, my friends with that eye on you at my gate send it to take a closer look every time I tinker in my barn. It floats over my hedge with ease, comes so quietly the dogs are too frightened to bark. They duck for cover rather than make any fuss. Why is it here? In a few weeks, when I test fly that HFC, it'll get a real treat. That doesn't answer my question. You're Marsco. Figure it out. Why scrutinize a has-been associate and terrorize my dogs? Down on a knee, he called to comfort the quaking pair. Their tails between their legs, they shook noticeably, reluctant to even step toward their consoling master. Looking up, he asked, "What sort of threat do I pose? You're not making any sense." "It's a Marsco world," he said. Okay, so that gives you a sense of the tension between father and daughter. I should have mentioned, you know, she's a professor. That's always a problem. She's a professor at the Marsco Academy. And theoretically, you graduate from the academy, you are trained for space flight. So you should be ready to pilot or be one of the other officers on what's called a Marsco shuttle, which goes out from a moon orbit all the way out to the asteroid belt. Okay, so you know, has a very successful career. Some of you can identify with this. She's stuck on finishing her dissertation. She hasn't quite gotten her doctorate degree, but she, you know, is fine with Marsco, and because she hasn't brought herself to question it. He, of course, has stepped out of it. So you see the tension. You see the fact that Marsco's, you know, sort of snooping on him and different things like that. Okay. So that's the first little section I wanted to read. I have one other section. Oh, we're great for time. I want to do a Q&A. I know some students asked for me to do a Q&A, so I want to save time for that. But are there any questions now, something they didn't understand, the technology? I don't want to get wrapped up in the tech. When you buy the book, there's no if, right? When you buy the book, there is a glossary at the end. You can shoot to the end and read some of the words. And then some of the slang, if you don't get it, is standard military slang. So any question? Yeah.
I think you said it was 25 years that Marsco has been in control.
Right. So about that.
Walter has been pre-Marsco world then?
Right. Marsco, Harif, there's a number of, and of course, all of them have come back and forth from Mars and they've hibernated. I'll do hibernation in a minute. And so Walter's about 60, but he looks about 40. Tess is around 30, but she looks younger than that because as a girl and a young woman, she, you know, hibernated going back and forth from Mars. She grew up on Mars as a girl. So it's all in the book. And if it's not in the book, I'll make it up. Godlike. You know, this is great. I mean, how often, you know. There's no witnesses if I go wrong. I just do it, you know. So unlike a classroom where I can get reported to the dean, you know. Anything else? Any other? Yeah.
What was like the process of getting it published through, like Amazon?
Amazon. It has to be formatted for Kindle use, and then you just set up an account and you launch it. And I have you know, there's a few other little tricks and gizmos. Neil's the expert. There's a couple books out there you can read about the PR and everything. But yeah, and there have been several successful writers lately who have published totally online as opposed to, say, J.K. Rowling. So I would like to join their ranks. So I make no bones about it. So. Anything else? You can ask. Yeah.
All right, so did you read that, like the first part was to explain the kind of father-daughter relationship, or was it to show that the whole Marsco control?
Well, both. The father and daughter have a lot of tension, which is almost natural for fathers and daughters. But on the other hand, you know, it's partly professional. He's kind of stepped back from Marsco and is really questioning it. She kind of, he sends her stuff about Marsco and she won't read it, for example. That's earlier in another passage. And then there's the, you know, his dream is to set something up that can compete legally with Marsco. This 12 thrusters, which is explained in another part of the book, is Marsco's policy that sets up a monopoly in space. Everything has to be standardized to Marsco standards. And so there couldn't be PCs and Macs in this world, for example. There could only be Marsco standard stuff. So that's how it is with space travel. Okay? Well, let me go on to the second passage. Tessa was very much in love with another cadet when they were together at the academy, and his name is Anthony Grizzati, who goes by the nickname Zot. And personally, as an Italian-American, one thing I wanted to do was write an Italian-American character, right of an Italian-American, who had nothing to do with the mafia. So anyway, I did that. But also, Tessa and Zot were really tight. There was a possibility they were going to get married, and Zot was training to be a pilot, because most of the officers that graduate from the academy go into the MAS, the Marsco Asteroid Service, or they become an engineer like the Millers. And suddenly he decides, I'm going to graduate, I'll get my commission, but then I'm going to get trained to be in the hibernation service. Now, the Hiber service is, the shuttles take a long time to get to Mars, right? And Mars is a moving target. And then they also go to the asteroid belt, which is even farther. I'm not Ken Murphy. I'm not going to go into this, but it's AUs, you know, and all this kind of stuff. So anyway, it's quite a career change for Zot. He was training to be a pilot, and then suddenly he's going into the Hiber service. And Hibermen are the butt of the jokes in the space service. You know, they're considered, you know, like dirty old men because, you know, everybody's kind of frozen and cadaver-like, and they're sort of awake and leering, and there's all kinds of things. And then also, when the crew is asleep and they're the only ones awake, they get paid more because of some glitch in their union. And so they make a lot of money when they go to Mars, because most people are asleep, and then they get paid like the captain, and you know, and there's all these little ribbing them that you're only doing this for the Marsco units. That's what replaced money, dollars, Marsco units. So it would be like graduating with a degree, bachelor's degree, and then deciding to get a 6-month certificate at a tech school, and you know, which is nothing wrong with that. They cast aspersions at Minskew or Marsco, but anyway. It's, you know, so that's part of what breaks them up. And what's really broken them up is Zot has volunteered to be on this experimental ship, the Gagarin, that has gone from Mars through the asteroid belt all the way out to Jupiter as an experimental ship. Now, he's not on the crew running the ship. He's actually conducting an experiment with a new type of hibernation. You can only hibernate for about 6 or 7 months max. But this new type of hibernation called cryogenic stasis, or cryo. Now, cryo will really allow somebody to be under almost totally a block of ice. He's figured it out. They can go 50, 60, 100 years, 200 years. The people he's working, he has 6 volunteers, and they've almost been under for 6 years. And they've got 3 or 4 more months to go back to Mars. So the ship, the Gagarin, has docked temporarily at a colony, an independent colony, and the researcher that designed this program, Steerforth, has come out and joined the ship. And next, he didn't go all the way to Jupiter, just Zot did. And then, so Steerforth now is going back with Zot and the Gagarin back to Mars, okay? So that's kind of the action that's going on. And Steerforth wants to go into hibernation. He doesn't want to be awake. And he only wants Zot to put him into hibernation, even though Zot's really not supposed to. There are other icemen on the ship, you know. So anyway, that seems to be enough information. If not, I'll stop and fill you in, because I know what happens. Okay. I hope I do. Let me just get this out. Just that's a little bit better. So the ship has just left. A week later, when clear of the asteroid belt, the Gagarin headed toward Mars. With the hydraulic fuel taken on at the Adams-Levier colony flaming through the quad engine bells, The expedition ship gathered speed for her last homeward leg. That extra pair of engines will kick us along nicely, Steerforth commented to Zott as the latter prepared him for hibernation. You sure you want this? We'll be in Mars orbit in a little over 3 months. 3 months of total blackness? What in solar for? Zott scoffed at the suggestion rather than reply. He had used his years beyond the belt to explore as best he could. He had augmented a ship's dish antenna for an enhanced scope to look deeply into space, for the pure science of it, something Marsco wasn't fond of lately. Even with that small-scale instrument, he'd been able to gather files of substantial new data and gophered much more in cobweb sites long neglected by other associates. The whole universe beyond solar waited for disks to explore it, yet it remained as unexamined as the far side of the moon in the middle of the last century. Let me ask you something else, Steerforth began, breaking the silence. The Hiberman nodded without speaking. Any good ass on board? The busy Iceman ignored his colleague. Come on, it was either sensational or you got zilch. Marsco, how Marsco? So binary. Look, why'd you take on this mother of all sorties anyway? To become a monk? Or for all those Marsco units? Cha-ching. Who said I was a monk? Oh, Steerforth stressed by drawing out his comment. Mending a broken heart, huh? Hey, the best way for that. He gestured rhythmically and crudely. It's like I've always said, there's always someone else to poke just down the hall. Looking at the balding, short, unremarkable, and incompetent middle-aged man, Zott tried not to laugh. Chicks must cream in their thongs just at the mere thought of you. Missing the intent, Steerforth gave a knowing wink. Bingo, bingo, bingo. Zott worked on in silence, then asked, tell me something. What is this all for? I mean, this cryo. It's well beyond anything needed at present. And from what I've seen of Jupiter, why return? More than 95% of the belt asteroids aren't mined or inhabited. Marsco has no need, indeed no desire, to go beyond the belt. Yeah, this expedition was the closest it's come to pure science in years. I guess you could say that. That's loaded. What the hell do you mean? Pure science? We orbited Jupiter, examined several of its moons. We went to the trailing Trojan asteroids. Those are the real name of asteroids that trail on and precede Jupiter in its orbit. I didn't invent that. But last century's astronomers watching the Schumacher-Levy comet collide with the surface learned more of Jupiter than we did. We looked for potential colony locales, for mining-worthy asteroids and moons. We looked for water ice and frozen methane. So that's not science? Not when you're really only looking for future mining sites, Steerforth snidely countered, idealist. And what, you're the realist? Damn straight. The older man's bloodshot eyes bore into Zott's brown. Listen, he said, learn this. You're an associate. The world's ours for the taking. We can have it all. Do whatever the hell we want. Just do it. Quit all this sniveling about the past and about the future. Live it up today. What did they once say? Seize the day? They were Romans, and they said it carpe diem, and their empire fell with quite a large bang, as history reports it. Well, you better grab yours before, he gave a gentle laugh, partly to signal his willingness to switch topics, and partly out of his reluctant fondness for Grizzati. Look, we didn't create this world. All we did was inherit it. Zott wasn't answerable to Steerforth, and he knew in an hour the irritating associate would be out of his hair for 3 months. Without comment, he picked up where he left off and continued prepping the VBC researcher. Hey, Steerforth grinned, no hard feelings. He held out his hand. The gesture of shaking hands was not one often shared in the Marsco world. The senior iceman knew enough never to tick off somebody about to put you under. He would risk the finger disc to finger disc shock to avoid a horrible hyper. One of the things icemen will do to somebody is really give them a terrible icing, and they end up, with bowel infections and colitis and stuff. So they have a way of getting bad. Never. That's another adage. Never tick off an iceman. Look, you ask, sort of. This is Steerforth here. Seriously. Look, you ask, sort of. So I'll tell you, sort of. He finally confided, off the record, nothing official. He paused, shrugged, and then went on. I don't know what old Harriff's got planned. Martin and I aren't exactly buds, if you catch. But I hear a lot of rumors. A spaceship, well, duh. I mean, one designed specifically for deep space. So, Zott concluded, unlike the Gagarin. Exactly. Zott gave a shrug and looked out the viewport. She, the Gagarin, she's really just standard pieces on to make an old-fashioned shuttle into an enhanced platform. Nothing new or special at all. Extra fuel tanks, another pair of engines. But more to the point, all this cryo crap isn't just to make us obsolete. They both laughed. No, far from it. We'll still be needed. And Harriff's aiming for a new engine concept. New design? How? Like, I know the specs. I've only heard things, you see, only heard them. I never saw anything. Not even a single peep at the schematics or concept models. Something propelled by ions, not chemicals. And then the boss, Doc Harriff, he says to me one day out of the dusty and red Martian sky, David, push on with those cryo plans, stat. Like I can pull such a design out of the air. Or out of a memory bank, a continental memory bank. That's the previous group that Marsco overthrew. Look, it was all legit research, right? I checked their results and tests against mine, their data against my trials. Got me there, says Zott. So anyway, all I can confirm is that I heard that something's going down. But Christ, it'll be years. I tell you, I can see what's under construction in the orbiting docks. And there's nothing that seems remotely like it can do the impossible. Like house a crew in deep hyper for 50, 100 years? 150, 200? I tell you, I've designed a system close to that. Well, we've designed, Zott corrected. Steerforth winked. Got me there. Grisati had the IV tubes ready to start bringing the necessary fluids to keep the man asleep safely for months, a system far simpler and far less complicated than the future-oriented cryogenic stasis in the further bay. Steerforth reached out and stopped him. One last point, Anthony. Think about this one, for Christ's sake. You'll either go back to the MAS fleet, the asteroid fleet, going back and forth, or you'll stay at the VBC, the Research Center on Mars. You'll be at one of those two places. I'd love to have you. Either way, not to security, right? You know how many Academy grads ended up as officers in security, mucking around, patrolling hot zones? Zones are where the prims are kept, okay? Nasty places. Zott shook his head. Lots, nearly 40% this last grad class, well over. All that space-based bump about shuttles and egress my ass, those cadets had to learn, and then a few weeks past receiving their commission, they're in urban gray with an Enfield and a squad of troopers in tow. Something changed while we were post-belt? Not that on Mars I'd hear any more than what you'd heard on board, but rumors again, Anthony, rumors that something just ain't right on Earth. Some zones, some even run-down subsidiaries, they're all becoming IED City. Christ, everybody's carrying an Enfield. Everybody? Well, every associate. But you know what I mean. It's hot down there on Old Blue these days. Way hot, way too hot. Needs no ghost. I know, rotten in Denmark. But seriously, watch your mouth, Anthony. Marsco wise. I know it knows how to shut up those that open their yapper too much. He chomped his 3 times for emphasis. Yeah, Zott answers, but don't worry. I'll be too busy saluting to complain. Be careful. It's not. Be careful. It's not you returning a. Be careful. It's not you returning a salute from all your new troopers. Anyway, when on patrol, you'll be too busy to complain. So CYA, my friend, CYA. Steerforth grinned one last time at his new witticism. You know, you are a monk, hearing my confession. Shall I give you a penance? Not on your life, but I'll give you some free advice. De-ice that blonde in the 5th Bay, the titty-luscious babe. If she's not space crazy, she'll be willing. Types like her are always hornier than rabbits after Hyber. The words of a master. The senior specialist, winking before he drifted into hibernation, thought Grizzati's remark was serious. Most of the flight and science crews on the Gagarin went under hibernation soon after the solitary passenger Steerforth. The ship's own specialist took over after belt aggression, leaving Zot to tend his six in cryo and work on his own scientific projects as time permitted. As promised, he supervised Steerforth personally, the VBC specialist not trusting anybody else. As at the cryogenic workstation, Zot was always alone. As the days passed into the first month, he thought about leaving Marsco. Dozens of independent shuttles moved between the Earth and the Belt, but the Hiberman knew that many of these were smaller ships that relied little on hibernation. Or perhaps he thought, I'll really go near Luddite, resign my commission, and join Father Kavanaugh's SOAM Prim School. Zot had met the priest through the Millers, been down to his run-on-a-shoestring campus in the worst zone of Rio. Perhaps that would be his next move. In the following weeks, he looked over his files of data about the post-solar universe. Even if there were a confirmed Earth-like planet out there somewhere, he finally concluded half out loud, even with a deep space craft and my cryo, who'd ever go? Ever want to go? Besides, what's really out there? After the Hiberman dimmed all the lights in his cabin, the viewport filled with countless stars, dots merging into clusters, individual ones brighter than the rest, the backdrop of the Milky Way, a few larger lights, obviously the post-belt planets. All those stars and solar systems still years and years away, he confided hopelessly to himself. Only Dante or Milton could conceive a more vacuous hell. Standing at the plexiglass as if to get a closer view, he pondered infinity. He was nearly overwhelmed by its immense nothingness and its entire totality. The only other thought that crossed his mind was Tessa, the Tessa he loved so deeply once, the Tessa lost to him completely. Only Dante or Milton could conceive of a more vacuous hell than life without her, he thought, before busying himself to drive her from his mind. Okay, thank you. Thank you. Of course, I'm a student of Charles Dickens, and before Dickens was Dickens, he got the advice from another writer, I think Wilkie Collins, make them laugh, make them cry, make them wait. So it takes a while to get through it. It's a good chunk of a read, but I hope you'll enjoy it. For most of you, it should read pretty smoothly if you're interested. So, other questions or any questions or yeah.
Okay, so when Tessa, you said she looks younger than
Right,
she actually
right.
looks 16 and frozen. So does that mean that Anthony is aging fast?
They're a little bit off. He was already 2 years older than she is, but they're pretty much. He's reluctant to hibernate, as all Hibermen are. That's kind of the trade secret. But he's in his early 30s, and she looks like she's more like early mid-20s. You know, yeah. It's just part of the game I'm playing. You know, so it ties in though because yeah, it's part of the hook. got to read it. There'll be a quiz. No. Yeah, yeah.
You had indicated that as the author, you have complete control. You can have
Pretty
anything
much,
you
yeah.
want to have happen. Thus, you get to choose all the names.
Right.
Why Tessa? Why is Tessa's mother's name Bethany? Why did you have a Poindexter? Why did you have a Wilkes? I mean, why those names? And then there's a point where she finds a letter that had been written by her father, dated February 15th, 1992. Why did you pick that date?
I don't know about, well, yeah, it would have been 19, no, it should have been 2092. There's a typo.
Oh, no, I take that back, because it said 2015, it said 2/15/92.
92. Ah, yeah, no, that's, okay.
My contemporary.
Yeah, okay, the names.
Jumping part.
I have to tell you, some of the names are important. There's a shuttle, a space shuttle, named the Piazzi Central at the beginning part of the book. There was again, very sensitive about being Sicilian. A Sicilian monk named Piazzi was one of the first people to actually spot an asteroid with a telescope. So I read up a lot about asteroids. I dogged Ken Murphy. I got a funny Ken Murphy story to tell you at the end, but a good, because he's such a brilliant man. But some of the names are important. Wilkes, I wanted people to think of John Wilkes Booth. Grisati, I just wanted an Italian name. Tessa, I don't know. I had it with only one S. People thought it wasn't Tessa, so I stuck another S in there. Hawkins, there's a character, and I want people to think of young Jim Hawkins from, but a lot of the ships are named for a particular reason, and so if wiki, that's all I did. And it'll say somewhere in that wiki site, used in the Marsco Dissident. No. Yeah. Thank you. Yep. Walter Miller is an important name, and I picked him. There is a sci-fi writer called Walter C. Miller who wrote my favorite sci-fi book called The Canonical for Leibowitz, and it was written during the height of the Cold War, and it's about a post-apocalyptic world where there had been an atomic war, and this group of survivors form a monastery. They're monks, and it's 600, then it skips to 1200, then 2400 years after this atomic war. So you have a second go-around of the Middle Ages, the Renaissance, and then you have a modern period again. And I chose Walter C. Miller, although I think the initial is different, by accident because I wasn't careful. But I named him specifically, and so that's Tessa Miller. Bethany, I just like the name Bethany. I have a good friend, Palmer, so I thought I'd use his name. Little things like that. But yeah.
How did you keep track of everything as you were writing?
Yeah, well, yeah, grid sheets and notes to myself, and yeah, it gets. I have 4 novels written, so it gets a little tough at times, but yeah, you just kind of do things. All right, professor of composition mode. I tell my students, you got to draft, you got to write things down, and I will come up with the name of a character, and I have a grid. How old, when were they born, what are their nicknames, what are words that they always use, what do they like, describe them physically, what's their love life like, and I just fill that out for every character before. So I'm working on another set of sci-fi novels in my spare time, and I have pages of, this one guy's nickname is Kite, and his wife is cuckolding him, and I shouldn't give away the plot, but anyway, make you want to buy it. So yeah, you just have to write all that stuff down and catch yourself. You hope that careful readers catch it for you before you publish it. Yes, sir.
So is this your first novel that you've had published?
This is the first one I've had published. I have the 4 of them written. I'm working on volume 2 called Marsco Triumphant. It should be available December. Maybe it'll be after the first of the year. And then the 3rd volume, Marsco Sustainability Project, will be next summer. And then there's a Miller, among his other things. Miller is one of these professors that you never want to work with because they just like do everything. He runs this farm and he designs engines, and he's writing the history of Marsco, which is called The Ascendancy of Marsco. And the fourth book I purposely wrote as an experimental. You know, technically in the trade, it's a metafiction. It's written supposedly the collection of journals, by somebody. 14 narrators narrated, 14 or 16. And so there's military reports, battles. There's film, the text of film reports. There's official histories that by this time you realize they're lying to you. And it's the story of how Marsco rose to power, and the group that preceded them, called the Continental Powers. The Continental Powers decide that they're going to downsize countries, and so they downsize their countries by dumping all their poorest citizens. They become the prims. And say, well, we're going to have a country of just New York City, and then all you poor people in Harlem are your own country, and so India breaking itself up, China breaking itself up, so you have the wealthy 21st century pieces, and then they dump all the rest. Something like South Africa tried to do when they still had apartheid, and they created homelands for the blacks, and they were just treated terribly. So history repeats itself, especially in science fiction. So that's how the world rises. So, hi.
Hi.
Thanks for coming. Yeah.
How did you, how much of a stickler were you for scientific accuracy? And what kind of
Quite a bit, actually. It annoys me when I thought I discovered something and then it turns out, like the finger disc, they can put a chip under your dog's skin, like the Prim disc, the RFID. If they really wanted to, they could keep track of us, They don't have to just read our computers, which apparently they're doing with regularity. So I think the hibernation is not really that impossible. A couple of things like that. The Enfield is actually, I read about the design of how they're going to replace gunpowder and artillery shells. This is why it hisses, and fire artillery with an aerosol. And so I just miniaturized it. You can carry one as a gun or a pistol. So a lot of things. But I thought when I started it, the implants under your skin was like, wow, and they're doing that. They're actually doing that now. So, but as far as the planets, and I read a lot about the asteroids, Mars, all that kind of stuff, I really was very, very careful to get that as accurate as possible. So if it said, like, I didn't invent the name Trojan, the name of the USC football team, they deserve to be orbiting Jupiter. But I didn't invent that. Hey, I have to say it, you're all adults. They are called the Trojans, and what's the #1 prophylactic in America? I don't have to make a joke after that. The UC Trojans, you can get them in aisle 6, so. But after that, it's all parody after that, so. Yeah, Dan? Yeah.
Speaking of which, if you had known the publisher, do you think your editor would have think you take anything out?
I don't think so.
Okay.
It's pretty tame. I think. Actually, the violence can be a bit violent at times. The sex is pretty tame. And it's not designed to be a sex book. My mother, who's long dead but was going deaf, and I was talking to my sister-in-law's sister, who's an educator in California, and she said, "Oh, you're writing a book." She goes, I want to read your book even if it's a textbook. And my mother whips around, who's writing a sex book, Deaf is just, it gives you some, you couldn't feed a line to somebody like that. So I'm working on this other set of sci-fi that's set in another imagined solar system, several solar systems. And there is this real thing out there, and they know nothing about it, called dark matter and dark energy and dark gravity. And, they really what we look at night when you don't look at the clouds here and blizzards in Marshall, and when you can see the stars at night, we only see a few percent of what's really out there. Most of it is dark matter and dark energy. So I sat down with Ken Murphy one time, and I said, Ken, I'm doing this other sci-fi series, and I want to have them be able to very quickly, because I don't want to do the hibernation again, you know, and so very quickly go from solar system to solar system, and I'm just like, I'm going to use dark energy and dark wormholes. You know, where can I go to learn about this, or what can you tell me? He goes, oh, invent it. We know so little, you'll probably be right. Just invent it. So, but Marsco, I tried to be pretty accurate. The names of the fuel that I stumbled over are the real names, and I got that from reading Apollo 13 about the attempted landing on, and that is the real name of the chemical fuel stuff, and it is obsolete, and they're still using it, you know, it's the whole point. You know, Marsco doesn't want to change anything unless it controls it, so it controls everything. So. Yeah, way in the back.
How long did it take you to write the novel?
An individual novel doesn't take that long. I started the first Marsco book in April of 1997, and I'd finished it by about September. I didn't teach. I finished teaching. I had the summer, and then I had a sabbatical. And then I started book 2, and it took me a while to finish book 2 because I ran out of sabbatical time. But the revision takes a long time. So I had the first 2 books a long time ago. Then I wrote actually book 4, which at the time was book 3, and then I wrote book 3, which is now 4. Okay. Anyway, whatever the hell it is. One of them I wrote in the summer, but that's just the draft. And so I've been working on them pretty consistently. During the last 17 years, Marianne went to graduate school. I was chair of a department. You faculty will appreciate this. I was on the LEP conversion committee, LAC conversion committee for 5.5 years, which is Dante or Milton could not have invented a more vacuous hell than that committee. And so I've been, you know, I teach full time and sometimes overload. So editing, you know, takes third, fourth seat to a lot of this. So when I have time, the writing, I have no trouble writing. A first draft is no problem. The second draft is a killer. The hardest thing to write is the second draft. Because you say such wonderful things and you don't give a damn. You know, and now with computers, you open a file, you can go on forever. You don't care, you know. There's very little of it that's left, you know. I didn't read part of this, but there's a character, Chen, and she is a pilot and everything. And she started out as a co-pilot, and then there was another major character, Fuentes. He started out as the pilot, and then after a while I thought, well, how sexist, you know, when I flipped them, you know, so little things like that. And that was the first chapter I wrote, and that's now chapter 5 and 6, you know, so you never know. You start, you just do it, keep doing it. Yes, sir, way in the back, yeah.
What is it about sci-fi that appeals to you as a writer?
Yeah, I planted him in the audience. What appeals to me about sci-fi? I want the literature to be something that gets people thinking. And so you have a blank canvas within certain parameters, but pretty much a blank canvas when you do sci-fi. If I wanted to write a Civil War novel, I'd have to stick to the South or in gray and the North or in blue. You know, there's certain things you'd have to stick with. You'd have to deal with slavery. And when you write sci-fi, you get to create a broader world of what you want to do, so that anything you bring in shouldn't be associated with real historical fact unless you're subtly, you know, making those comparisons. And it just gives you a wider range of things that you can, I feel, that you can deal with. One thing that I love is the fact that I have 2 very, very strong women characters, Chen and Tessa. And, you know, this is not a put down to most of the women in the audience, but, you know, if you create a woman character in the 40s, they're going to be raised under, they defer, or you know, I mean, there's just certain constraints that I just didn't want to deal with. So I do have outline. I've got so many books outlined, but at least I have in my mind an idea for a World War II novel, you know, so I might go back and write something of World War II. But the main couple things I'm working on, besides getting all these finished, is another sci-fi series, 2 other sci-fi series, and then I've got I've got a Jane Austen knockoff that I want to write, sort of rewrite Pride and Prejudice. And why not? You know, those things sell like hotcakes, you know. So I think I'm going to publish that under my mother's name. But yeah, that's the sex book. Not with Elizabeth. Oh my God, Elizabeth is beyond that, above. Anyway, my Elizabeth. So thank you. That's a nice question. Yeah.
Were there any like major like writing blocks that you had or something, or just like a character or a plot detail that you just?
Characters are bossy. Zot was going to be a 12-year-old, you know, and he didn't want to be a 12-year-old, and you know, and then like you had to create a bigger and bigger role. And like I said, Chen was going to be a co-pilot, and she's the pilot. So I don't ever get a writer's block, though. You know, there's times when I can't write because I'm just simply too busy. But a lot of times that's choice. You know, I'd rather, you know, watch a Notre Dame game or, you know, something rather than write. But that's usually a choice. But I don't think there's anything such as writer's block. I just, you know, you write through it, you just keep going. But the characters get to be pretty insistent. They really want things a certain way, and you'll know, you know. And like Marianne said, you know, they've lived with us a long time, and I don't set a table, you know, place a table for them, but I kind of draw the line there. But you know, they're insistent, you know, so they're fun though. I mean, so, and the other thing is too, and I'd love for you all to take this away. Go ahead and use that tagline, "It's a Marsco world." Let's get that into the dictionary. You know, let's really become the next little. That would really help sales. Thank you. I hate to be so crass about that, but. Anyway, anything else? You guys have been, this is the first time, well no, I read it once when it was way a long time ago. But I said I was not gonna read it again until I had it published, so that's why I'm reading it again. But you guys have been great. The smaller group at the library were fun this afternoon too, but you guys were great. So other questions or other observations? I can hang around and answer some other questions, and we can talk longer about self-publishing. And like I say, Neil really knows it all and different stuff. How many are trying to write sci-fi or fantasy, just out of curiosity? Yeah. Oh, way up at the top, you. Yeah. And you ended up in my class by accident. You'll rule the day. Rule the day. So, good. Well, thank you. Thank you very much for coming. We got an ad for the.
Thank you all for coming. The next Visiting Writers Series is going to be a duo, Lori Armstrong and Manuel Ramos, mystery and crime fiction, and that will be Monday, October 14th. They'll also be at the library at noon, the Marshall Lyon County Library at noon, and then here at 7 o'clock. So you'll be seeing the posters going up for that soon. And if anyone wants to join us, we'll be going to Shay's Lounge across the street at the Ramada Inn to talk more about literature, writing, your projects, and become part of the literary conversation. So please join us. Thank you.